Thanks, Matt and Sam. It's a great story to follow, and if you want to get more details, that case study on Dorify's work is at reso.org under our news section, so you can take a look at that in depth. Our next session we have coming up is Rearchitecting Real Estate, so perspective from lots of new companies coming into the space and how they can work with our current incumbent companies to make your customers' outcomes better in the industry. So coming up, I think we have Bill and James first, Heather, and John will be on his way shortly. We're doing a little mic turnover right now.
Thank you, Sam.
Hi, everyone. I'm James Rogers, co-founder and CEO of RealReports. First, some minor housekeeping. I want to extend a sincere thank you to Sam and the whole RESO team. I know personally this is my favorite conference of the year. I really look forward to the thoughtful conversation and collaboration that we have going on here, so thank you. Second, I want to make a quick apology to two people. One is my wife, Julia. She works in building engineering. She's a real stickler for grammar and syntax. The other person is Matt Fowler. I think he's probably here somewhere. I saw your comment on LinkedIn. I know re-architecting isn't a real word, but I'm a software guy, and in my world, we architect things and then we re-architect them. So with that said, sorry, Matt, this is re-architecting organized real estate.
Why don't we go down the line real quickly and start with you, James. Give us a little brief intro of who you are and what you're doing here.
Sure. Well, I just told you a little bit, but James Rogers, co-founder and CEO of a company called RealReports. Really high level. Our company, kind of think of it like an AI supercharged Carfax for homes, where we aggregate data from over 60 different places and put it in one very easy to use spot so that agents and consumers can process that when they're thinking about buying or selling a home.
John Heithaus.
Morning, everybody. I'm John Heithaus. I'm a third-generation real estate kid from New York. When I bought my first house in 1981, mortgage rate 17%. My uncle was the broker. I tried to slip the MLS book in my briefcase, at which point my wrist was slapped, and he said he could go to jail for 15 years for sharing me the book. So really pleased to see the progress that RESO's brought. But in all joking aside, I did about 25 years hard time at Realogy. I was in the corporate relocation business, did a stint at CentralLock, and then best job I ever had was Chief Marketing Officer for David Sharon at Bright, MLS. MRIS in the days when I was there. I'm currently Chief Marketing Officer with a company called Ocusell. Hope you guys know about it. If not, I'd love to chat about it. My colleague Dee Jackson's here with me too. We're all about compliance, business rule standards, and helping everybody have a back end of choice, not necessarily a front end of choice. That's what we do.
Heather Elias.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Elias, VP of Real Estate at Pearl Certification. I just rounded the corner this summer on my 20th year in this beloved industry of ours. And my work with Pearl, we take home performance, energy efficiency, solar power production data, and package that in ways that it's usable for the real estate industry at the time of transaction, whether that's at the MLS level or at the agent level.
Awesome, thank you. Bill Fowler, 25 years in the industry. SourceRE is an independent database and syndication network for MLSs. So, James, looking at this panel, you have varying degrees of commitments to the industry in an institutional sense. John, you have the longest tenure, I think, of all of us, and have a depth of experience having been on the executive level at a very large MLS for quite a long time. Heather, you've been in the industry for a long time, but have just a recent, I guess, exposure to the MLS environment, although kind of like, navigating around it for quite a long time. And then James, you're relatively new to the industry and relatively new to the whole thing. So the experience levels I think that you all have, the obvious first question is, when you started doing this, meaning with the companies that you're with right now, you kind of entered the industry at an inflection point. We're all kind of rethinking how we do MLS, as example, Dorify that we just saw. Went from being an MLS, a traditional MLS, to being a technology company. You saw those slides, that's what a technology company does. I mean, I think agile was mentioned twice, the CTO, and there's a director of engineering, and that's the kind of stuff that a technology company obviously supports and executes. So James, starting with you, what are some things that surprised you as a technologist coming into this industry, specifically MLS?
Well, I think the whole premise of what we're up here talking about is something that I'd like to think that the team's quick study, but the amount of collaboration, we were excited about it, but I think the amount of collaboration, I mentioned very quickly in this room that happens, but within all of the, I guess we like to call them vendors, but different companies that really understand that by working together is how we make this better, because I think it's easy to think about, again, I've been building tech for a long time, and it's really easy to think about how one or a few companies might want to fix everything. But the reality is that's just not possible. And I think that by adapting and building technology in a responsive way, but then really importantly lifting each other up in a way, I think that's how we make a difference here. And I think all of us on stage work together in a meaningful way and an actually technically integrated way. And I think that approach being, in my opinion, the only real way to actually solve a lot of the industry's hardest problems is something that I'm actually very excited about, but I think something that may not be obvious, that it needs to be that collaborative approach.
John, same question for you, and again, through the lens of you having been an executive at an MLS for a long time, and now you're kind of on the other side of that, especially at a marketing position at a large MLS. The go-to-market, that entire concept for a technology company, when you were in the industry and like doing the stuff that you were doing at Emirates, and now where you are, what are the things that have changed, or what things have surprised you about the environment that you're?
Well, the first surprise to me is that there really is no surprise. The more things change, the more things stay the same. If you think about a real estate transaction, going back to the beginning of organized real estate, the fundamentals of it are not really changed. One of the reasons I got into this business after failing out to be a professional musician back in the 80s was I asked my grandfather, what do I do? What kind of job? He said, John, people always need a place to live. That's why real estate is such a great business. And when you think about the business of real estate, it's finding people a place to live. Yes, there's all this other stuff connected with it. So the big surprise is the fundamentals have really not changed like in a really long time. Technology enables a lot of things. It speeds the process up. It brings certainty. It gets some of the mundane nonsense out of the way. However, you still got to deal with a home inspection. You still got to understand what a leaky roof is, or a bad septic system, or a bad title because it's it's clouded title or whatever. Technology can't solve a lot of those problems. It can just make it easier. So I'm not a ritualist or an originalist, but I think the important thing is to understand what's the task at hand and how can technology best enable a better outcome, a more cost-effective outcome. I don't see a world where you're going to talk to a robot. Anybody's ever been in a self-driving Tesla car, for instance? I did that not too long ago, and I couldn't wait to get out of the damn thing. I mean, it just really scared me to death. And I'm a bit of a risk taker, anybody who knows me. But so the biggest surprise to me is that what's old is new, and so many of the fundamentals of the business have not changed because of technology. I'm saying this at a technology conference at my own risk, but I think that's the reality of it.
Right. Well, Heather, finally to you, same question. The go-to-market process for Pearl has been interesting. You knew a lot of people going in, and so yeah. What were some of the surprises, or maybe the path that you took to get where you are right now? And
Yeah. I mean, there definitely have been some surprises along the way, and for those of you not familiar with my work, I spent about 7 or 8 years consulting with Proptech companies coming into the real estate space. So understanding the challenges of needing to be integrated into the business systems that already exist. Having a one-trick pony product is not going to get you to success in this industry. You talk about data integrations, you talk about working together, right? And finding the ways to plug into the way that the industry already works, right? Being additive versus disruptive, let's say. For me, the surprise has been adding information into the MLS. There doesn't seem to be a clear pathway for that. Adding data in, being, we're in a position where we can create more transparency in the listing transaction. We can do things for the agent so that they're not having to assemble that information. And it's really hard to feed data in. And I thought that that would be easier, and it's not.
Yeah, nice segue into, we're here under this grand umbrella of interoperability and standards. It's what the RESO stage is all about, and I think what the companies on this stage represent is the ability to do something for an MLS environment that trickles down to the agent, that adds value to the broker and client relationship without having to change anything. I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I started out at a company called Solid Earth, where the answer to success meant that you replaced someone. That's a cutover, and people lose their jobs during cutover. It's a disaster. My brother once described it as a divorce and brain surgery all at the same time. Both net positives, but obviously negatives in the near term. And so, James, back to you on this interoperability thing, and when you approach your MLS customer and you describe how you initially thought about going to market and providing value into that environment, and maybe how that maybe changed over time when you realized that there were some barriers or there was friction in that. It wasn't just like you just put yourself on a shelf and off you go. It was more of a process. That you weren't replacing anyone, I guess, is the point, that you were more like an additive, which was something of a new environment for you.
Yeah, it sort of comes back to what I was saying earlier, but it's been what I've been so excited about, that I think there are a lot of companies in this room that have been building amazing technology for decades, and it's, this industry wouldn't function without that. And I don't think any of us should expect that any of that needs to or should be replaced, but that doesn't mean it can't be supplemented. And I think if you come into the industry and you say, hey, I've got this flashy new piece of technology, maybe you've never heard about it, we think it's better than some other thing that you may be using. If you don't meet people where they're at, and when I explain this to people that aren't in the industry, I think so many of us came from the industry in some way, shape, or form. A lot of people in this room probably were real estate agents actually practicing at a point, and I think that bubbles up into the way that we end up doing business. And so we really need to meet people where they're at, whether that ends up being the consumer, or in most cases for a lot of us, the member, the agent, where if you're not saying, I'm gonna have that button exactly where you're already spending your time, you're waking up, logging into the MLS, because that is and remains what it should be, your daily ritual. So if you're not in that, you're not supplementing what they're already doing. And they're so busy, they're on the road, they're answering phone calls, they're texting, they can't learn a new platform if it's not already integrated into what they're using. So that's why I think this marriage and collaboration that especially gets fostered in this room, where everybody, big, small, medium, can work together to make this industry better by collaborating and saying, look, you've got a piece of this that's very, very different. And I know we've all had this conversation on stage. It's why we work together so closely, because we say, look, your piece of that's amazing. I would never touch that. I'm not an expert in that thing, but you are, and you are, and you are. By working together, we can say, all right, this actually becomes it's sort of this 1 + 1 = 3 scenario, where by working together, the additive whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point. And again, going back to where I was just a second ago, and John, this is something you can speak to as well, is that technology generally in our industry has predicated on us having to change behavior. Sure. Meaning changing the agent behavior is often a death sentence to a piece of technology if done poorly. And James, your comment about being an additive, I think is a relatively new concept in our industry, meaning that adoption can take place as a supplemental added value to an existing ecosystem without having to remove someone to make that possible. So John, regarding the workflow, regarding what the additive functions of Ocusell, what have you seen or what are you experiencing as you approach the MLS environment? People that you've known for 30 years, how are they taking that, I guess?
Well, one of the advantages of having multiple personalities is I have 2 careers. I'm also in the music business. I own a record label in Nashville. And the reason that's relevant to this is we use software to record artists. And there are, Apple makes something called Logic. There's one called Pro Tools. It's kind of like the MLS software. But there are plugins that industry standards have created in the music business. If you want to pretend your studio is Abbey Road in London, there are ways to electronically emulate that through these plugins. And there are industry standards that have enabled that to happen. It's called MIDI, M-I-D-I, which is, kind of a version of RESO. And if it wasn't for those standards, the interoperability of a recording studio just couldn't be. In our case, these are companies actually that we are integrated with RealReports. When you're creating a listing, it automatically brings in all kinds of qualified or quantified information and qualified information to make the listing more robust. Heather's firm brings in environmental scoring to a property. What a cool thing for a listing agent to be able to say to somebody, hey, this is an 8 out of 10 already in terms of energy readiness, and this company certified it. Bill's company has been working on standardizing a database that allows the true owners of the data to be able to monetize and control it. Those are standards that wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for RESO, and it wouldn't be possible for us as a small, 15-person company to look like we're a whole lot bigger and a lot more robust, like James says, because 1 + 1 = 3. And that's the interesting thing, kind of a parallel between the music business and how it works, right, and the real estate business and how it works.
Yeah, great, thank you. And so Heather, same question there about interoperability and the partnerships that are created. Again, not disrupting the workflow. You're offering something that is an additive. Literally, it's an added data, and you mentioned it earlier. I think every MLS executive would welcome new data. We want to add to the compilation. We want to increase value for the broker, but that's not always an obvious one-to-one answer. Meaning there isn't always a place to put that. So the partnerships you created, I think, have greased those wheels a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what those partnerships have done to make life easier on you?
Yeah, I think there's, we talk about meeting the customer where they're at, and because of the fact that, a particular agent's workflow in one part of the country can look completely different than a typical agent's workflow in another, we have to be creative and we have to be flexible, and our products have to adapt to fit the need of the market that they're flowing into. And so partnerships like what we have with these guys make it easier to make that happen at scale. When we think about the end user, the agent themselves, and the manufacturing of a listing and what that process looks like, having information about a home, there are so many different data points that go beyond bedrooms and bathrooms and square footage. And agents just are not equipped, nor do they have the time, nor do they have the expertise to assess and bring a lot of that in on their own. And when you think about the data that is actually out there, we should be able to do a whole lot more for an agent at the point of their assembling of information. RealReports certainly solves part of that, Ocusell solves part of that, and we solve part of it too. But if you think about it from the standpoint of an agent starting to put a listing in and having way more fields filled out on their behalf, that would be a wonderful thing to get to for an agent to go, yes, these things are true, and then we have a very rich home search, then we have an informed consumer. But we don't get there by trying to do that ourselves in one place and then bring that to the industry on a silver platter. We have to work together.
There's also a huge generational shift obviously going on with regard to buyer demographics and the requirements of buyers. That my 30-year-old son out buying a house for the first time with his wife, and $600,000 starter houses is a little scary, right, when you think about that in most markets. But the way they approach their home search and the analytical nature of a 30-something buyer that grew up with technology, that grew up with video games, it's an entirely new qualitative experience. And if the technology doesn't meet that, you're automatically considered old school and irrelevant, because you can't keep track with that. And I really don't want us to lose sight of the generational change that's going on with the first-time buyers, because that enables them to move up dominoes. That's how the real estate business has worked since the beginning of organized real estate. Yeah. And if we don't pay attention to that demographic properly, we're going to miss out.
It's just a quick note about the International MLS Forum that we just came back from. In Milan, one of the conversations that you and I had and we witnessed, firsthand, was the question of the validity of the MLS in, overseas, wherever that might be, the American model, and copy and paste that elsewhere. And this concept of the single source of truth, which we assume is everyone wants, truth is at the MLS. The MLS is truth, and as that information permeates, as to your point, your 30-year-old son is out there looking for truth. You're going to drop down $600,000 and basically mortgage your entire life on this one piece of property. You need something more than just listing information. Listing information is a snapshot of that property as it's for sale in space and time at this particular moment. But then, James, you have this incredible, deep, and wide bit of information that I think that generation of buyers are looking for.
Community. I mean, there's
Is there an international component? Anyway, just a quick tangent, because that was obviously a key point that we discussed there. So, wrapping up, James, you have quite a journey. You have quite a notable couple of partnerships that you've announced recently on LinkedIn. Congratulations for winning those. I know that it was quite a journey to get from, I guess, point A to point B. You guys have done a great job with that. On either side of that relationship, on young companies that would be following in your footsteps that want a similar return, and MLS executives in the room that might maybe want to streamline the process a little bit. I know you have a great knowledge on how that process went. You spent the last 2 years hand-to-hand combat getting this work done. What's your advice on either side of that situation?
Well, I don't claim to be able to teach any MLS executive how they should do their job. I think you've probably all forgotten more about how this industry works than I'll ever know. But I think, from my perspective, I think the more that people can be willing to adapt and to move fast, I think is probably my biggest piece of advice. And I mean that at a lot of different levels. So, again, I've been building technology for a long time, so I think as a technologist, you're used to adapting at a technical level. But I think to really function in this space well, you need to be able to adapt both at a sales and product level, but also at a technical level. So I think if you come in and you say, I think something that we're all well aware of, and everyone in this room is that no two MLSs are alike. So if you come in and say, we have a one-size-fits-all solution, and it should work in the exact same way for everyone, then you're just not going to function well in this industry. But if you can say, we've built something that we think works really well, but then, like I said before, you can meet an agent where they're at, but you meet the MLS where they're at to say, we're going to figure out working within your framework and your system. And that might actually mean that you need to build some new technology to actually work with a great partner. Because they say, our system's a little different. That might mean that you're integrating with a couple of different providers they already use. It might mean that you actually build some new features to make this function within their market. We all know that data might look different across different places. So I think adaptability, both at kind of a business operations level, maybe it's not just charging a different amount for a different scale, but also understanding that your technology and your product probably need to adapt in the same way.
Yeah. John, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I mean, one of the advantages of being around a while, this is like my 8th market cycle or whatever that I've seen, from 17% mortgage rates to the S&L crisis to low doc, no doc mortgages and foreclosures and stuff that went down. And it's kind of interesting to look at if you want to give somebody advice, you kind of got to look at the history of the industry. So 20 years ago when the dot-com revolution came in, it was like, it's going to change our lives and everything's going to be crazy. And then we shifted to Web 3.0, where 2.0, that was supposed to be personalization, and you went from one to all to one-to-one. And then, of course, ChatGPT came about 2-3 years ago on the front where, AI is going to change it all out. And now that's kind of reaching its inherent limitations, right? First of all, there's discriminatory stuff in a lot of algorithms that we have to be careful of as an industry, which is a separate subject. But now I think the advice is we are in a totally new phase of compliance in a rules-based deal. And if you're an MLS that doesn't have this as the top of your priority, if you're a brokerage that doesn't have business rules management and compliance, because it's one thing to get your wrist slapped by an NAR thing, it's another thing to get a certified letter from Washington, D.C. from the Department of Justice saying, we'd like you to come in and visit with us on this little deposition on your business practices, And that's, in all the years I've been doing the business, I've seen a lot of existential threats. But that plus the lawsuit environment, it's $1 billion in fines that have been paid for, in my English major's opinion, a crime that was never committed, right? And these brokerages, NARs writing a big check, and brokerages, all because they violated some kind of business rule type of thing. And as an organization, Organized Real Estate must get its act together on that subject. And this is more kind of a dark cloud warning than it is anything else. So that would be my advice, is to really, really look at the rules side of the business and the compliance side of the business, and make sure you got a shop that's really tight. As if not, they're going to come calling.
What do you think, Heather?
So my advice, it's not advice, it's an ask. We are at the point where our housing stock, consumers have different needs. right? And I don't want to even use the word climate turns off the conversation with a lot of folks in the country. But what I'll say is this: our building standards have changed. Homes are being built to be more sustainable, more resilient, more efficient. There is a real need for the consumers to understand when they're considering houses, how those homes are going to perform in the environment that they sit in. You know, we have lots of tools that can measure risk in the areas surrounding a house. We have not yet solved for helping the agent articulate properly how hardened a home is, or how efficient a home is, or even as simple as what do the solar panels that are sitting on top of that house mean? So, right. Like, this is a conversation that we need to have now. That part of it can't wait. So,
James, have I left you enough time to restart?
Probably get through it.
Okay. All right. You want to give that give that a run?
Well, so look, like I said, we architect things and then we re-architect them. So sometimes your slides end up at the end. So I think it's actually still a nice wrap up to the conversation we just had. So I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of conversations very regularly with MLS executives, and something that is not going to be news to any of you, but I hear a lot, is that in a post-compensation world, the most critical role of an MLS is as a data company. I'm of the mind that you've all done an amazing job at that. I think the syndication and reach of listing data in the United States is unmatched in probably any other industry. But there's this problem. If you want to be a really, really modern data company, you need to be an expert in so many things. And that's why we're having this conversation, because you need to think about this. Here's a few examples. Modern database structures, we talk about front end of choice, computer vision, you want to extract details from listing images, accessibility with something like voice to text, artificial intelligence for something like data analysis, or automated document management. Obviously, we're all thinking about compliance this year more than ever before, but that's not even the comprehensive list. But this is something that comes up a lot, and I know there are a lot of people in this room that really care about this. Sam mentioned this before, but this is a real example. I mentioned before, my company aggregates data from over 60 different providers. This is a real property in Vermont where when you look it up in 3 different major providers, you get 3 different towns and 2 different zip codes. If we can't agree on an address, I don't think that any one of us in this room could actually agree on how to build all of those technologies within one place. But the reason we're all here is because I think we all agree on this. There is a better way, and it starts in this room. So the reason that we're all on stage together is because we have done some of the hard work to build our technologies together to lift each other up. But we've also worked with so many other amazing providers, and this is by no means a comprehensive list. Everyone in this room is working on this, because when I have a call with somebody, they say, of course we should work together. Because that's that idea that if we can specialize and vertically focus things where we can say, look, we've identified a problem that we live on a day-to-day basis. I know everyone on this stage has said, I've lived this problem, and I wake up every day thinking about how do I solve that problem in the best way possible. But then we've already integrated in the existing tech stack that is so valuable, and I mentioned that before. We're doing it in a collaborative way, and I think importantly, if you can think about it this way, you can embrace that adopting modern technology is easier than it has been before. It's actually faster, and it's more affordable. And this last part, I just really couldn't ever overstate what this means. But I know that from my perspective as a technologist, the efforts that go on in this room around things like UPI, of course, that address example, it's solvable because of the efforts that are happening here. Interoperability and standards, that's why we can all work together in such a fast and agile way. And then I think my favorite is the community. I think Rebecca was saying up front, you just go to the launch event last night, and the number of conversations I had about how we can all work together to make this industry better is palpable, and I think it's a really critical part of how this works. I'm gonna skip through this slide because I already talked to you about this, but I think really when we work together, not just on stage, but with all of the providers that are within this industry, we can really make it better together. And just to give you a quick example of what a life cycle can look like in a modern data listing, again, by no means comprehensive. What's the first step? An agent's going to win a listing. It's always going to be the first part of a life cycle. But as Heather was mentioning, you might then go leverage home performance data to more effectively market that home. And then you use an ad edit platform to input that listing. It populates over 95% of the necessary fields to list that property. An MLS can stay in control of your data flow because you now own your database. That listing appears in all relevant MLS software because once again, that's the critical place where everyone is and should be spending their time. That listing's automatically enriched with comprehensive data powered by AI. You can use AI-powered voice to search for properties, helping with accessibility, building a better, more engaging experience. And then an AI property advisor can help you analyze documents to mitigate risk. Of course, after that, you close the deal and profit. But I think the important thing is here, you might have just interacted with 10, 12, 15 different companies. But there are a lot of people in this room that are working very hard to make it not feel that way. I think to the end user, to the member, to the consumer, the goal is they can rather seamlessly transition between all of these things because we're working together, and it's all because of the standards and the conversation that happens in this room to make it so that we can collectively, collaboratively build that to really achieve that 1 + 1 = 3 environment in this industry and work together to make it better in a much faster and more approachable way.
Man, that works so much better as a closing, I think, than an opener.
We re-architect
Great
things.
stuff. Hey, thank you, James. Thank you, John. And thank you, Heather. Thank you, guys.